For the 10th time that day, Marjorie wished she'd packed more clothing. She studied her dress in the mirror and frowned. You don't think this is too, I don't know, floral? Seated on the bed, her friend Angie flipped through Marjorie's magazine and didn't even look up. Did he say formal dress or just to wear a dress? I don't know. My head was spinning a little, Marjorie confessed. Okay, it had been spinning more than a little. It had been whirling like a carnival ride. She'd been sleepy from the late hour as they'd returned from the pre-bachelorette party, and even though she hadn't been drinking, she was exhausted from watching the antics of Bronte, Gretchen, Macie, and the newcomer, Violet. They'd taken a ferry a few islands over, and it had made poor pregnant Audrey seasick, and she remained sick all night. So Marjorie, being responsible down to her bones, had taken charge of the evening. She'd shuttled the drunks and the one sick pregnant lady from dinner to the nightclub, and then on to the strip bar, where they'd lost all the money they'd brought, and Audrey proceeded to get sick at the table. And then Marjorie spent the rest of the evening holding a damp cloth to poor Audrey's forehead while the others partied. Still, Bronte had enjoyed herself, and that was all that mattered. Marjorie did her best to ensure that the bride had a truly wonderful time at her pre-bachelorette party, since Gretchen, as the maid of honor, was determined to drink and have just as much fun instead of running things. That was fine with Marjorie. She liked to see the others enjoying themselves. But she'd been more than a little exhausted when the cab had pulled up to the hotel, and it had stunned her to turn around and see the man she'd been daydreaming about right at her elbow. He was just as good-looking as she'd remembered, too. Handsome, with that dark hair, chiseled jaw, and those gorgeous eyes she could stare into for hours. He was also shorter than she remembered. That had been disappointing, and she'd worn heels that night, since it was just girls, and standing on the curb, she'd towered over him. Just standing next to her in heels made most men retreat. No one wanted to date a string bean, as she'd been told a million times before. But her dream guy hadn't commented on her height at all. In fact, he'd kissed her hand, charmed her figurative socks off, and invited her to dinner. And now, here she was with less than 4 hours of sleep, after running around with Bronte and Gretchen and the girls for additional fittings, and a last-minute change of shoes, because Audrey's feet were swelling and wouldn't fit in the Louboutins that Bronte had selected for all the women. She was now getting ready for her date. Her date. Just the thought of having a date made Marjorie's breathing speed up. She'd dated all of twice while in high school, and in college, she'd flirted with a guy at a party who hadn't seemed to mind how tall she was. Until the next day, when he'd sobered up. He'd then gone to his friends, laughing about how he'd been so drunk that he'd made out with the flagpole. So yeah, other than that, she really didn't date. Any guy she was vaguely interested in, she was too terrified to ask out, and no one ever asked her out. Other than that one night at the frat party, she'd never even made out with a guy. Second base was as far as she'd ever gotten. It was downright embarrassing, and it made her feel like an idiot. So having a date tonight, despite the height difference of herself and the man in question, to say she was nervous was an understatement, and she didn't know what to wear. Normally she'd have gone to Bronte, who was sweet and friendly and wouldn't steer her wrong. But Bronte was wrapped up in wedding preparations, and Marjorie didn't want to bother her. So she'd gone to Angie. Angie had worked with Bronte and Marjorie at the diner for the last couple of years, and she was a nice enough lady. She was a mom, divorced 3 times, and a dainty Southern belle with a tiny figure and big hair. Angie was utterly friendly, but around her, Marjorie always felt a bit more ungainly, more like a misfit. Still, she knew Angie dated a lot, and she knew Angie better than the other women, who were only casual acquaintances. If they teased her about her lack of dating history, she wasn't sure she could handle it, whereas Angie was just being Angie. She might say something hurtful, but Marjorie knew she didn't mean it.